So let's look at the first of the old gen characters to ascend to Primaris Space Marine hood, Chapter Master of the Ultramarines, Marneus Calgar. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're continuing our look at the new Space Marine Codex and the supplements that have followed it. We've been going through each of the new units datasheet by datasheet, and now it's time to take a look at Calgar himself. In this video we'll take a look at his rules, any potential combos we can see with him on the tabletop, and some different ways we could think about running him on the battlefield. For the purposes of this video I'm going to talk about Calgar himself. Sometime over the next week or two we'll look at his Victrix Honor Guard. In the background, Calgar is essentially an exemplar among Space Marines, as an Ultramarine having a flair for strategic genius, but this doesn't stop him from leading from the front and inspiring his men to acts of great valour. He's personally led boarding actions onto hive ships, killed an avatar of Cain in single combat, and held a gate at the siege of Zalathras against a greenskin horde single-handedly for a day and a night. So generally both very clever and very fighty. But let's take a look at how that translates to the tabletop. Marneus Calgar in his new Primaris Armour of Heraclus is an HQ choice for the Ultramarines. He'll cost you 200 points, he has a movement of 6, weapon skill and ballistic skill of 2 up, strength 4, toughness 5, 8 wounds, a mighty 6 attacks plus shock assault, leadership 9 and a 2 up armour save. The Armour of Heraclus is a Gravis armour variant, so he has some of the associated drawbacks of that not being able to fit in the Impulsor and taking up 2 transport spaces in the Repulsor. He's armed with the Gauntlets of Ultramar, his special power fists with built-in bolters. In melee they function exactly the same as power fists, strength times 2, AP -3 and D3 damage, with the notable exception that they don't have the -1 to hit penalty. When they're shooting, they're essentially a souped-up Storm Bolter, a 24-inch rapid-fire 2 weapon with strength 4, AP -1 and 2 damage, so particularly good at frying other Primaris Marines for example. He comes with a bunch of special rules. Firstly, he has Angels of Death, which will give him And They Shall Know No Fear, Shock Assault, so he's up to a mighty 7 attacks on the charge typically, Bolter Discipline, so if he stays still he can rapid-fire those Gauntlets of Ultramar twice up to 24 inches, and Combat Doctrines, allowing him an extra AP -1 on those gauntlets when they shoot in the Tactical Doctrine, or AP -4 in melee if the Ultramarines should ever choose to go into the Assault Doctrine, which most of the time they probably won't. His Armour of Heraclus gives him a 4+ invulnerable save, and it also confers to him the ability of halving any damage that he suffers rounding up, so if he's hit by a damage 5 weapon for example, he'll take 3 wounds from that, or if he's hit by a damage 2 weapon, he'll only take the 1 wound. This combined with toughness 5 and 8 wounds means that he's remarkably tanky. It's going to take a lot of concentrated firepower to bring Marneus down. For example, even if you get to fire las cannons at him, it will take 18 Space Marines holding las cannons to bring him down in 1 round. Considering it only takes around 23 las cannons to bring down an Imperial Knight, presuming it's only got a 5+ invulnerable save, that's really quite a good comparison. Obviously he is a lot more fragile to things like mortal wounds, heavy bolters and anything that's damage 1. But he does have the character keyword and less than 10 wounds, which means that he won't be able to be targeted provided he's not the closest unit to your opponent. As the Chapter Master of the Ultramarines, he gives the usual Chapter Master reroll bubble, and he can reroll all hits within 6 inches of Marneus Calgar. The Chapter Master upgrade usually costs 2 command points and is usually worth taking in most Space Marine gunline builds. It really puts the damage of any units that he's standing next to very much through the roof, so it's certainly going to be good at buffing any Ultramarines units that are nearby. He has the Master Tactician ability, which means that if he is your Warlord, you gain 2 additional command points. So a very good reason indeed to make him your Warlord, particularly as he already has one of the best Ultramarines Warlord traits, which is to regain command points spent from a stratagem on the roll of a 5 up. So by taking this guy, you could easily be adding 5 command points by turn 3, provided you regain 1 a turn under the Tactical Restraint rule. If you're including Marneus, then I'd strongly consider making him your Warlord, as having access to all of these command points is a really nice bonus, and lets you employ lots of the fancy tricks that your Ultramarines can use. So overall, Marneus Calgar is a very fighty, very tanky Space Marine character that provides a lot of command points and a Chapter Master reroll aura, all for a very very good price for 200 points. Ideally he wants to be moving towards the enemy to get to use that powerful melee profile while buffing a lot of Ultramarine units nearby him. Let's look at a few ways to buff him up and some combos that we can use with Marneus, and we'll start with some good units to keep nearby him. Firstly, his Victrix Honor Guard that he comes with in the box can certainly make him or any other Ultramarines characters more tanky and survivable. Their rule is if Marneus loses a wound, then the Victrix Guard squad takes a mortal wound instead, and that wound on Marneus is not lost. They're essentially a good cheap way to get a few extra wounds on your Ultramarines characters, and if the enemy doesn't wind up killing them before your characters hit his lines, then they can chip into close combat with their power swords. I'll talk about them in more detail at a later date, however. As Marneus is so good at buffing friendly Ultramarines units, you can easily build a bit of a buff castle around him and some other characters. He would pair well with a Lieutenant to give Ultramarines units that reroll 1 as well as his full Chapter Master rerolls. An Ancient would be good as well, so when those Ultramarines near him die, they'll be able to shoot when they die and access him and the Lieutenant's rerolls. And you could even throw Tigurius in there as well to make those units that they're buffing harder to remove via his -1 to hit ability. Chaplain Cassius is another way that you can soup up Ultramarines units to perform their strongest on the tabletop. Getting 2 litanies per turn is absolutely great for buffing Ultramarines units. If you are taking a lot of characters, I'd certainly consider thinking about an Apothecary. If your opponent's done a lot of effort to do some damage to Marneus despite that halving damage buff that he has, and then you just pile the wounds back on with an Apothecary, then it could be very demoralising for them indeed. This little buff castle will work quite well with virtually any Ultramarines units. Aggressors are one of the strongest choices in my mind, because like Marneus they want to walk slowly towards the enemy, and they have a hideous amount of shooting that can easily be buffed with all of these units that we've just talked about. Other strong choices for an advancing Ultramarines gun line would be Intercessor squads with bolt rifles, as they'll be able to move and shoot twice with the Ultramarines tactical doctrine, and they can also fight decently in close combat. Behind the frontline troops, you could easily have something like a Repulsor Executioner or Leviathan Dreadnought, or another strong shooter unit moving up behind the front line but still be in range of these buffs. As a Space Marine and an Ultramarine, Marneus has lots of stratagems that you can potentially use on him. As a very, very fighty Space Marine character, you should always consider using Honour the Chapter to fight again, if he needs that extra bit of damage output to kill a scary opponent, or only in death does duty end for 2 command points to allow him to fight when he dies, and maybe drag down whatever killed him with him. To further boost his melee fighting and potential, you could use either Gene-Wrought Might for extra hits on 6s, that will be 1 command point, or Transhuman Physiology to help him survive a incoming barrage of heavy weapons. They're both relatively expensive in terms of command points for the benefits that you get, but if you absolutely have to have the most damage potential possible, or the most survivability possible, then they're both options. Out of the Ultramarine stratagems, you can use Inspiring Command for 1 command point. This could let him boost his reroll aura by 3 inches to try and get more of your army full rerolling shooting in your first turn, for example. Hopefully you'd be able to position your army well enough that you don't need to do this, but it's always there if you want that flexibility of movement. Fall back and re-engage is another strong option. Say if Marneus is in a fight with something that he's going to struggle to kill, you could use this to fall back. He could still shoot as he's an Ultramarine, and then he'd be able to charge something more opportune. So if your opponent thinks that he's got him tied up with a big horde of Plague Bearers, for example, then Marneus can still just freely wander out and maybe off a nasty character that's nearby. So how would I use Marneus on the battlefield? I think I've already alluded to the fact that he's good as a advancing Ultramarines gunline character. Put him with the extra support characters of your choosing in the midst of a bunch of shooty and fighty Ultramarines such as Intercessors and Aggressors, and potentially have some more heavy guns trailing up behind him such as Repulsor Executioners, regular Repulsors, or other things. The Chapter Master rerolls are incredibly powerful, but unless you're using Marneus Calgar's melee profile, then you are paying over the odds for them. You could achieve the same thing on a regular Space Marine captain and 2 command points for around about 120 points less, should you just want to use him as a buffing unit for a gunline. That's why I think he's best used advancing up the board alongside these fighter units. I'd also consider dropping in units to help support him, maybe having a big unit of Terminators drop in inside his buffing aura and then charging in to make use of his full rerolls in shooting and then melee would be good. You could also do something similar by dropping a drop pod with Grav Devastators nearby him, or maybe having some Primaris Inceptors come down and unload those bolters on the enemy. Once you advance into the midfield, you're going to have to react to what your enemy does next. It's perfectly possible that they might be either advancing out to meet you, and you'll have to try and pick your combats wisely, which units you can kill with your units on the charge, while hopefully minimising damage in return. There's a good chance that the enemy won't want to just roll out to meet your very fighty chapter master in combat, and he might face a bit of a slow slog up the board to try and reach combat. If his escort units do get blown away, you can certainly think about advancing him and hiding out of line of sight in ruins to hopefully spring a charge next turn. For a character, he is fairly tanky, so is a little bit more susceptible to going out on his own than some characters might be. But as with any tanky thing in 40k, concentrated fire will kill him, if he takes enough of it. When he is in combat, definitely remember the options for the stratagems to either fight when he dies, or potentially fight again to off a scary unit. And if all things go to plan, hopefully him and his host of aggressors and intercessors will march up the board, putting all the Xenos and heretics to the bolter and power fist, before chilling out in the enemy deployment zone on any objectives and getting line breaker. If you are taking Marneus, it's worth considering Robuse Guilliman as another option, and there are positives and negatives to this. Point for point, Guilliman probably is a better fighter, and does give you 3 command points for being the warlord, which is nice. However, point for point, I think he is less survivable, which is saying something, as he's a toughness 6 monster with a 2-up save and a 3-up invul save, and his main disadvantage is that he doesn't fill an HQ choice, and he has to be taken either as part of a Supreme Command detachment or a Super Heavy Auxiliary detachment. To be honest, I think that the two are very well balanced. You do get a proportional upgrade for taking Guilliman, compared with Marneus based on the extra 150 points that you pay for him. Either of them work, but I probably wouldn't take both in the same Ultramarines army, because then you're over-investing in good buffing characters in my opinion. So overall, I think that Marneus Calgar is definitely a competitive choice for Codex Ultramarines. He really helps tie in with what seems to be the main philosophy of the Codex, marching towards your enemies with bolters drawn, laying down bolter fire before charging into close combat. And I think that his rules really help reflect this on the tabletop, and he's fairly costed for what he adds to your army. I certainly suspect that we'll see him in some strong Ultramarines competitive lists, but I do think that he takes a sensible general to get the full amount out of him, to utilise both of his powerful buffing abilities and also his powerful melee ability, because if you just use one, then you're not really going to be getting the right value out of him. So let me know down in the comments below if you'd take Marneus Calgar and why or why not. If I've got any rules wrong or underestimated any powerful abilities, please let me know as well. I'll be continuing with my Space Marine Codex videos over the next few weeks, so please feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see some of those. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you guys in the next video.